with a lot of people having a lot of questions. So thanks for joining us, John, taking time to give us some great facts and help us move forward in a positive way at this time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me fine? I take that as a yes. All right. If for some reason there's some kind of issue, be sure to let me know. I'm going to pull up one more thing here on my computer. All right. So I don't know if any of you attended this same seminar last year, but I could not get my computer to go. And so we had a lot of fun dealing with that. And so today I'm actually going to be able to do a bunch of the things that I wanted to do last time and be able to show you guys some things. I think what we have to start with today actually is not the COVID forms. There were two forms that were created for that. There's the COVID-19 form that talks, basically contemplates an extension because of the pandemic, but then there's also the on-site preview addendum that, talks about how to navigate things in case you can't get into the property. We will go over both those forms. Those are forms 790 and 795. But another issue that came up is effective May 1st, there was a new version of Form 101 that came out because of the clear cooperation policy. And so if you are not using that form, it came out at an odd time. Usually the forms come out June 1st, but it's a little bit different for this because the National Association of Realtors made the clear cooperation policy mandatory starting May 1st. And so everybody had to comply with it by then. And we needed a new Form 101 that would do that. But interestingly, as part of revising Form 101 for the clear cooperation policy, they also did a lot of other amendments to it. So there's actually quite a bit to go through on that form if you haven't looked at it yet. I know probably it came out at a time when maybe you weren't signing up that many new listings, but next time you start signing some up, then you'll be familiar with it and the difference in it. I guess what I'll do is just start with the clear cooperation policy itself. And if you're not familiar with that, what it is, it's a new mandatory rule in your MLS. Every MLS had to adopt it. Every property, after it's publicly marketed, must be inputted into the MLS within 1 business day. Now, that's not 24 hours. That is not any other thing. It's 1 business day. So make sure that you're aware that that language was actually chosen very intentionally. I've had a couple of questions on the hotline since it came out, sort of asking about, well, what does it mean for this and this and this? Does it actually mean 24 hours because of the weekend and things like that? No, it's 1 business day, and that's it, okay? If you want to read about why they ended up going that direction, there's actually a pretty good really boring rundown of that on the National Association of Realtors website. If you just Google clear cooperation policy, NAR, they have a page that'll come up right away, and you can read to your heart's content. As far as going through, let's see. All right, I've never done this before, so I'm going to see how this can work. So what I want to do first, before we start really getting into the forms, is just talking about where these resources are available on our website. Can everyone see my screen and the NC Realtors website there? Okay. So as you can see, I've already logged into the website because it's saying welcome, John. Okay. And I got to move something over here. In the upper left, if you're over here, if you can see my cursor, all right. Up here, we have a couple different things that you really need to be aware of. And these are, I don't know about you guys, if you've tried to navigate the website from these, the Action Center, Learning Center, Information Center, things like that. I think for some people that works pretty well, but for me, it's kind of hard to find information. If you have difficulty with that, there's a search bar right here. And that sometimes is the best way to find stuff if you kind of know what you're looking for. If you're looking for forms, that's what this pen is right here. You click on that, it's going to go to the forms, okay? And if you click on Q&A, that's going to take us to our legal Q&As. Legal Q&As come out every week, okay? And they're kind of published over several different platforms, starting on Thursday and then spanning over Monday to the next Monday. So what I want to show you here is every single time there is a forms change, so when it comes up in June or whether it comes up in May 1st in this case, what you can do is you can click on this Q&A after you log in, and you can scroll down, and here on the forms button, you'll see summary of forms changes. If you click on that, it has all the forms changes from all the way back to 17. And what these are documents that show you every single change that was made in every single form that year. So for this would be for the commercial forms for 18, right? Or for 17. 18 for commercial forms, 18 residential forms, 19 for property management, okay? So what I'm gonna do is over here, if you were to click on this, okay, it would download a document, and there it is, okay? And you click on that, and it's gonna operate maybe a little bit different on your computer, but you're gonna get this document here, okay? And it's a summary of the forms changes that happened May 1st. Now, the great thing, the reason I'm showing you how to navigate to this is because once you get this document, it has these links in the document. Now, underneath these links, so this is this is Form 101, okay? And underneath these bullet points go through every single change that was in Form 101. Well, I don't know about you, but that's a whole lot of mumbo jumbo that I really don't feel like reading. So the great thing about this link is you can click this link and it will jump to the actual Form 101, but in yellow, you'll see these crossouts and highlights and everything. And that's how I'm going to go through it today, because quite frankly, I just find that to be a better way to go through changes rather than looking at a block type in a document that summarizes it, okay? So here, what we have, this change I think was actually pretty important, because I think most people, when they fill in this blank for the expiration date, they think it's going to end that day. Well, if it's midnight that day, then that gets a little bit confusing. Now it makes it clear it's going to be this day, 11:59 p.m. As soon as it changes over to the next day, your agreement is going to expire. Now, you should renew an agency agreement before that ordinarily, but we all understand that we deal with real life, well, at least most of the time. Right now, I'm not even sure what to call this life that we're living. I won't even go into that. Some days I'm fine, and other days I'm much like you, where I feel like I'm living in a very disturbing dystopia. Anyway, whatever. I will say one of the highlights is I have 4 kids, and my youngest is a kindergartner, and I've become her kindergarten teacher. And I think if I was in a room of kindergartners, like a whole room of them, that would probably drive me crazy. But it's kind of fun teaching one. So it's, because she does the math and her numbers are all backwards. And I don't know. It's pretty cute. But anyway, all right, enough on that. In any event, all right, so it's going to end on the day now. And that's to make that more clear, okay? Then there's a new note right here on page 2. And these really stress that you really pay attention to paragraphs 3 and 4, because honestly, on the hotline, we just frequently get questions on these paragraphs, okay? And it's the fixtures and what's excluded from fixtures, okay? And there's been some edits in here. And then there is personal property. And obviously, I know all of you have run into issues with mortgage companies and personal property. That's something you have to be, you have to be wary of. Maybe you need to do a bill of sale, things like that to get around it. But in the listing agreement, that's not a contract between the buyer and the seller. It is simply a document or a portion of the agreement the understanding between the listing agent and the client so that you all are on the same page. So then if a client wants to get mad later about something that they thought they were going to be able to take with them, but ends up it's actually included up in here, you know, it just makes it a lot more clear. As far as getting along with your client, this is one of the most important things you can do with a listing agreement. We get a lot of complaints about this. Or we get complaints from the public. We don't necessarily address those on the hotline, obviously, because they're not realtor members. And so we don't usually handle those kinds of things. But as far as like agents calling us because their client is having a dispute about that, you know, a lot of times the dispute arises because it's a gray area of whether it's a fixture or not. And in case you've forgotten, you know, the definition of a fixture is something that is intentionally affixed to the land or the property, okay? Where it was attached to the property and it was intended to be a fixture of the property. Now, obviously, that's with that definition, and that's the legal definition, you can see where you could pretty easily get into gray area. It's just gonna happen, okay? Some things are more clear and some things are not. That's the point of this list. It tries to take as many of the common gray area things and make them clear by saying, unless you say otherwise, this is going to be considered a fixture and it's going to go. So that's why this list is so important, and it's to help try and firm that up. And I think on the whole, it works pretty well. But every once in a while, we still get, you know, interesting little quirks. In any event, I think you can see we've had some cross out here, all controls, and receivers and things like that. That's because up here, there's been this addition that's capitalized. Everything in there includes both the traditional and smart versions. And there's also somewhere here a portion, and I'm not sure if it's in this part or if it's below, but the seller needs to clear this stuff out, basically return it to factory settings. So if there's some sort of smart device in the house, which depending on the house might be the only smart thing in there, they need to return it to the factory setting, okay? Oh, here it is. It's right here on the next page, subparagraph C. All right. So that was a big change in here. That didn't necessarily have to do with the clear cooperation policy, but that was a pretty big change. And then we have here an edit in this note that just any personal property that will be part of the sale should be identified in this paragraph. So any personal property, just if it's supposed to be in there, make sure you're in there. Every once in a while, we will get some complaints because, you know, this has not been done well enough or complete enough. But most of the time, I feel like most agents do a pretty good job of this. I think the general rule is just be as specific as possible. Okay. So down here, we have a lot of edits with respect to the firm duties. And so what we have here is I think this is a new note. Yeah, there'd be some crossed outs if it was an edit of an old one. And this talks about the disclosure of offers and just basically making sure the client is on the same page with you as far as what the license law requires, okay? And it's really, if you look down at this crossed out section, it's really just moving that up to a note, okay? Paragraph B here makes it clear that disclosure material terms of an offer that's prohibited by the license law. So just making sure your client's on the same page. If you got a client that complains about it, it'll have you have part of the paragraph listing agreement now that makes that part clear for them, okay? This really is just to break this out a little bit here. You see these little headings, you know, disclosure of material facts, professional services, things like that. These are all just to help highlight in case you have a client who maybe doesn't read every word of the contract, maybe they'll at least look at the headings. In any event, you should do your best as the agent to make sure that you talk through these things as much as possible. And just so you know, at least with my screen right now, I'm not seeing any like questions come up in the chat. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go through the form and then I'll come back to the chat. So if you're chatting in there right now, don't feel like, you know, you're not going to be ignored forever. I'll get to it. All right. And then here, don't forget, this is new, these initials, just to make clear that the seller is on the same page with you as far as these requirements, which are mostly license law related. Hopefully it will tamp down issues that you have with clients threatening, actions in the real estate commission, things of that nature. All right. So marketing, this really is where we get to the changes that had to take place as part of the clear cooperation policy. So you can look at subparagraph A there. The firm shall submit pertinent information concerning the property to any listing service of which the firm's a member or which the firm's agents participate in accordance with the rules of any such listing service. And that's going to be different. If you're part of an actual realtor-owned MLS, then that's going to be 1 business day under the clear cooperation policy. But other listing services, other places that you're going to advertise the property, they're not going to have that. So the reason I bring that up is because we had some questions about this may. Hold on. Oh no, it's not this particular part. I think it was a different part. Where was that? Anyway, they'll be coming up. There's a part in here that talks about that, an MLS may require that. And that's really what it's getting at, is that not every place you're advertising the property is going to have a 1 business day requirement for you to put it in the listing service after there's any kind of public advertising. So anyway, that is really, as far as anything else on that, there's nothing too earth-shattering there. It's really just combining some of the stuff and really clearing it up and making the delayed marketing. Here it's talking about the delayed marketing, and there's some more changes down here on that as far as moving the coming soon up to the check boxes, okay? But in any event, it's really just to make it more in harmony altogether with the clear cooperation policy, making sure the delayed marketing also complies with that. But otherwise, nothing too crazy in there, okay? Here we go. Lock key boxes. This is check, just make sure that you note that is right there. Okay, that's the change in there. Let's see. Adding a little note here about the seller agreeing that the seller is solely responsible for securing all of the seller valuables, cash, jewelry, firearms, etc. So just note that. These are all things that maybe you don't need them right this second, but I will say on the hotline a lot of times when an agent is calling because they're having an issue with a client, usually I can point them back to whatever agency agreement they have and show them where they can actually just point to the client, listen, this paragraph governs this particular issue that you're having. Okay. All right. This is what I was talking about as far as the may, and it has to do with office exclusive. Okay. And so if the seller is going to withhold consent for the listing to be disseminated to other participants, then this is, where it's going to work. And this is where I was talking about the rules of any such listing service may require the listing to be filed with the listing service, or that the listing service be notified of the listing. And that's just to make it on, so it's clear to the seller, if you're going to do an office exclusive, there might be some other rules that go along with the clear cooperation policy. But as long as it's strictly an office exclusive, you're not really going to run into that. That is still going to be something that you can do, even with the clear cooperation policy in place. And I know we've gotten a little bit before the clear cooperation policy was adopted, we were starting to get pretty regular complaints about firms, doing almost entirely office exclusive all the time. Agents were feeling like the emphasis on cooperation was not being hit enough. So that, it's never going to be a perfect world. I'm not sure there's a perfect way to do it, because at the end of the day, it is a a free market. You are signing up to cooperate because, generally speaking, that's going to get a better price. It's going to be an efficient market for your client. But at the same time, if a client really wants to go a different direction and the firm has the ability to provide that service, then they can. So you just have to understand these are difficult balances to weigh. And I think the National Association has done their best to find, strike, at least make cooperation more emphasized than what some firms were doing before. But I will admit to you and readily admit that it's never going to be quite perfect. There's a note here about, public marketing and office exclusive. It's just for your client's information. Let's see. I think that is it. All right. So that is it on Form 101, okay? And if you're not using that yet, please make sure you are. They'll help you be, in. Now I've just hidden everybody. What have I done here? Okay, there we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can find, where's the chat? It's going to take me a second.
So John, I can tell you what the questions have been if you want. That'd be a little bit easier, and then you could just respond to them. How about that?
How about that? Sounds good.
Okay,
that way,
so
then I want to leave the screen up so we can go to it if we need to, but it's not. Oh, there it is. Oh, I found it. Aha.
Okay. So the first question that we have was from Kevin, and he wanted to be clear about what one business day means if it doesn't mean the next day. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, one business day is one business day. It's not Saturday, Sunday, or holidays.
So that means if it's on a Friday, Saturday is a business day or isn't? I think that's maybe the next question is.
Well, I mean, if it's like if you started, and this is a question we've gotten pretty often, but my understanding is that, if you started public advertising on a Friday, then you would need to enter it by Monday. That'd be within one business day.
I think that's probably a little confusing for those of us who Saturday and Sundays are probably our busiest business days, but according to what this form says, we're talking about Monday through Friday, as if we don't work Saturdays and Sundays.
I hear you. I believe I can bring that. See, now I've opened the Q&A part, and now I can't close that. Anyway, I can see if I can. Do you see on my screen here? Do you see the answer live thing, or do you just see my? No. Anyway, go ahead. All right, you can just go to the next question. I'll see if I can figure it out on my screen here.
Okay. So the next question I saw was from Kitty Stockton. She said, "Is the wall bracket a fixture and the TV personal property?" Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I think in the fixture section here. There we go. Hold on. There it is. Sorry. So it starts with surface mounting. I was looking for mount. It wouldn't do the search function, but surface mounting brackets for television speakers. So it's right there.
So those are fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
But the TV itself is a personal property.
Correct.
And then, so it
looks
like.
Well, let me just say, if it's like one of these home theater things, and it's really built in, I think that would be, even if it's not in this list specifically, I think there'd be a pretty good argument that it's a fixture. I would say if you have a home that has something like that, where it's built in and it's clearly intended to be permanent, make sure that that is clearly, outlined, that all that stuff is a fixture. Everything having to do with home entertainment would be a fixture, and it's going to be staying if that's what your client wants. You wouldn't want, if it's a projector that's been specifically mounted in a specific spot, for that particular screen, and then they take it, the seller takes it, it might be pretty hard to figure out what in the world to do with that. So.
Okay. It looks like Kitty's trying to clarify again on this business day thing, saying that the lenders count Saturday as a business day and Sunday and holidays not as a business day, but we're definitely saying it's just Monday through Friday is what you all are interpreting.
I already had it pulled up.
I think, weekends are really important for us to be clear about as we move into this. And in COVID time, I think I've heard that every day is Blur's Day, so who really knows?
I'm gonna look it up right now and make sure.
Thank you.
You can all see my screen?
I can.
Yeah, I can see right here, at least one local board said business days exclude Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. And I'm almost certain it is answered in, it's not coming up on a search function on my computer, but, oh, here we go. Right here. What is the meaning of business day? Business days exclude Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any other real questions. It looks like, did we need permission to get a lockbox taken out? And then she says, oh, I see that was moved. So I think that answered her own question. Anybody else have questions before we move on to the next section? Let's see in Q&A. Yes. Craig Fox. So Monday, 11:59 p.m. What does that mean? Let's see.
I think Craig was just trying to clarify the one day, the one business day.
So if something happens on noon Monday is one business day, later noon Tuesday, or 11:59 p.m. You said it's not 24 hours, it's the next business day.
It's one business day.
So Monday means anytime. If it's Monday, then that means anytime Tuesday before the end of the day.
And I would point them here.
Okay.
One business day to file the property with search. Specific questions about filing deadlines can be directed to your local MLS. So what that says to me is, as far as what the exact time is going to be, that'll be up to the MLS. So you'll have to ask them.
Okay. Good follow-up. I guess we should maybe have another future thing with our MLS people.
Yeah.
More educational opportunities for us.
Yeah, if your local MLS has not been out since this became effective May 1st, then yeah, you that would probably be a good thing to put on your agenda. It might not take very long to go through it, but there definitely is enough to go through. That's it's going to be a pretty big change for the way a lot of firms are working.
Okay.
All right.
I guess we can move on to the COVID forms. Thanks.
Hey, no problem. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I'm going to bring up something else. Let's see. All right, so everyone should be able, this is the Form 101 that we just went through. And I'm just going to come back to, so one more thing to close out the May 1st summary of changes, okay? So this is back to this, this is the link that we clicked on to get, this over here, the markup form, okay? So we went through all this, okay? And if you had any questions about anything I just talked about, it's likely answered in here. There's actually more explanation in here than what I gave. But also just understand, so some of the forms have guidelines for how to fill them out. And 101 is one of those forms. So Form 101G is the guidelines for completing the exclusive right to sell. And there have been changes made in that. that talk about these things as well. So just know that that is there. The Form 103 for vacant land, we don't need to go over that one individually because, as you can see here, it's all the same. It just lines up with the things we already talked about in Form 101. 103, the guidelines. This is actually, I think this should be 103G. That's probably a typo, but in any event, the guidelines for 103 have been updated. And then finally, I'm not going to go through this one, just to be aware of it. The Internet Advertising Addendum, Form 105, that has also been updated. Well, it's been updated, but one paragraph's been eliminated because of the clear cooperation policy, because you won't be able to publicly advertise without making it available in the MLS within 1 business day. And then if you want to watch a video on all that, because I am just not interesting enough, you can watch that here. My partner, Will Martin, will stimulate you greatly if you want to listen to all this again. And I think he goes more into the clear cooperation policy in that video, if I recall. Okay. So,
John,
yeah.
Can I just say that we had somebody that had her hand up.
Okay.
Looks like she's put her hand down now, so I was missing it. Let's see. Who was it? Looks like she's maybe left the meeting now.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Well, if she comes back in and she has a question, there will be a time for questions also at the end.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah, no problem. All right. So when this whole outbreak started, this is one of the first things that we did was to create the COVID-19 addendum. And it was really created because we had so little information about what the virus was, what it was doing, and quite frankly, what governments were going to do in response. This was adopted, let's see, in March. I mean, that was right at the very beginning. So really the biggest thing about this, there's lots of questions and that you can get into about this. So I'm just going to kind of go over this generally and then let people ask questions, because that might be the best way to get into sort of these different complications that you can get into with this form. Quite frankly, if you haven't got into complications, I don't want to give you any ideas of how to create them. but anyway, the real bottom line is this, is that number one, if you want to add this to an existing contract, you can. And if you want to submit it with an offer, you can. And there's really, it's really very flexible on all those things. And if something happens where a party has some sort of complication where they can't proceed or they need an extension because of the outbreak, then either the buyer or the seller can they can agree on a number of days that they'll be willing to extend the transaction if something holds it up. And then if one of them invokes it, then it will extend that number of days automatically. And importantly, only any deadline that has not already passed. Okay. And that's in this paragraph right here. It talks about that. I would say one of the biggest questions we've gotten is, what does it really mean when you have a delay that, is related to the pandemic? And in this form, that is defined as a COVID-19 related restriction. Okay. So what does that mean? Yeah. It means what it means. I mean, some things are just, some things, I know this is going to make some people uncomfortable, but some things are not capable of truly being black and white. And we've definitely got some questions on the hotline since this form came out that have really sort of raised eyebrows as to whether that's really COVID-19 related or not. It's going to happen. But interestingly, I actually got a call, it was like 2 weeks ago, I think, where one of the party's attorneys had decided that it was a COVID-19 related restriction, and I didn't really think that it was. But that just gets back to a point that I have to make all the time when I'm handling the hotline, and that is this, is that if a party really believes that they have a certain right under the contract, let's say a buyer terminates during due diligence, and there's under such circumstances, there's really no reason why the buyer shouldn't get their earnest money back. I mean, it's just a termination during due diligence. If there's nothing else appearing, then the earnest money should go back to the buyer. But every once in a while, you'll get a seller that says, no, never mind. No, for whatever reason, I am entitled to the earnest money. I don't insert whatever crazy reason the seller wants to come up with, but it very rarely does it make any sort of legal contract sense. Well, if the seller wants to assert that, they can. Parties can assert whatever legal rights they feel they have. And so you as a broker, your job in those circumstances is really just to say, listen, if that's the case, then you need to go consult with an attorney. In some cases, when they do that, they may be breaching the contract or getting ready to, or they might be, looking at a lawsuit. Like if it's an instance of a seller who believes that they have a right to terminate the contract, but they don't, and in some cases, maybe the seller does. I'm not talking about those instances. I'm talking about a case where the seller probably doesn't have it, but they're claiming that they do. Then all you can really do as a broker is say, all right, well, you need to go consult with your own attorney. I believe that there's a possibility that you're getting ready to breach the contract or whatever it is, but I'm not an attorney. I can't give you advice on that. You need to go talk to a lawyer. So I think the definition of COVID-19 related restriction falls into that same sort of gray area. It is just one of those things where the parties need to act in good faith. And in fact, they're legally obligated to act in good faith. That is implied in every single contract. As far as I know, every single contract in the entire country, I think that's part of the common law. Certainly in North Carolina, that is implied by law. So if a party is not acting in good faith, they're breaching the contract just by not acting in good faith. Anyway, what I would say is this, is that a COVID-19 related restriction is defined, and it is defined right here. And it has to be something that is coming up because of the pandemic, because of some difficulty with completing a transaction because of the outbreak. So it talks about specific parts, the buyer's inability to get a loan, okay? And it talks about either party may terminate, okay? But the seller keeps the due diligence fee, all right? There is this part here with the use of alternative methods. This really talks about in order, just using other methods to try and get the contract done. If, especially, I know over your way, you guys, you got a new order in Durham, but I think, I'm pretty sure that's still creating quite a few. I can't remember the order off the top of my head, but if I remember right, it's still a lot more restrictive than the governor's order. So, I mean, you've still got a lot of wrinkles to deal with when it comes to inspections and the buyer being able to get in the house and being able to examine it and stuff like that. So anyway, if you're having those kinds of issues, this talks about that and talks about what the buyer and seller will agree to, that they'll use alternatives as necessary. This is the extension deadlines, as I already said. What we have here, paragraph 4, if following the extension, so if the extension in paragraph 3 is invoked, and then for whatever reason, say your Durham order was lifted, and then you're just under the governor's order where you have a lot of flexibility to complete a transaction under that order. Then the buyer and seller make a good faith effort to complete the transaction contemplated by the contract as soon as reasonably possible. So regardless of the extension, the number of days. Paragraph 5 talks about the inability to complete the transaction. And it just says if buyer and seller are unable to complete the transaction within the number of days in paragraph 3, and then the contract shall become null and void, which is important because that means you don't have to send termination. It just becomes null and void unless waived or extended by buyer or seller as provided above, okay? And that's really talking about up here, alternative methods or completion of transaction. And that's quite frankly true, even without this addendum. There are times when the especially when the contingent sale addendum was, when that still existed, and the contract could become null and void, based on certain triggers in that addendum. That was one of the things. Parties would keep going anyway. And I guess if you close, then you've obviously waived. The contract is null and void. Anyway, so that talks about that, and it says, in the event the contract becomes null and void, seller keeps a due diligence fee, earnest money is refunded to the buyer. All right, and this talks about the relationship to this addendum and the delayed settlement closing paragraph, the 14-day delay that's in the 2T. All right, so that is the COVID-19 addendum. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions.
Okay, thanks, John. One of the questions that came up is there somebody talking in the background at your place? We're just getting some interference. No?
Yes. In fact,
Yes.
my partner Bill is giving another presentation in the office.
Okay, so Carol, sorry, it's not a TV, it's a real person, and it doesn't sound like we can do anything about it. So just speak up. And
the interesting thing is he's actually like that pretty much all day, every day. So I've sort of gotten used to the steady drumbeat of Bill's voice in the back of my head while I'm trying to do work. So I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
It's better than my children, though.
Not dogs, not children, not dishes. So we're all just learning. Craig wants to know, he says, I've seen some agents wanting to put TBD or 0 in the blank in section 3. Doesn't that pretty much make the addendum worthless?
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
If you're going to put 0 in here, then you've got all the flexibility you need in the contract itself. And this is purely in case you need more time.
Okay. I am not seeing any other questions. So I guess you can move on. Thank you.
All right. Then I will go to the on-site preview addendum. This one, you guys probably are, the people in Durham especially are probably having to use this one quite a bit because there's difficulty with agents being able to get in the houses there. So this really, the opening paragraph just, understands and lays out that it's understood between the parties that they may have difficulty being able to get in the house. So this talks about paragraph 1, buyer and seller agree that upon buyer's delivery to seller the on-site preview fee of this addendum, buyer shall have the opportunity through 5 o'clock on blank to get in there. Okay, and that's just really to it's sort of like a due diligence fee, a fee for them to be able to get in and inspect the property. And it lays out this right here and how it's payable in paragraph 2. And then paragraph 3 says, if the buyer decides not to proceed with the contract, whether or not the buyer has exercised the preview rights, buyer must notify seller in writing of the buyer's decision not to proceed with the contract, time being of the essence. Okay. And on buyer's notification of decision, the contract will become null and void. So again, that's just one of those things where it's just going to become null and void. And the seller will keep the fee at that point, but no obligations under the contract. Okay. And if the buyer does to proceed, then it really talks about the due diligence fee and the earnest money deposit. So that one, to me, is probably the simplest one. Are there any questions on that form?
I'm reading one question that said an agent received an offer on a coming soon property with this addendum attached. Got any comments on that? Is that okay?
My gut, I would need to think about it a little bit more, but my gut would say yes. I think that would be fine. If it's a coming soon listing, the biggest thing about coming soon is that you can't show the property to anybody. So if they wanted to, make an offer with this on there, they would go into contract, and on any, coming soon property, even if it didn't have this addendum, once you go into contract, the buyer's going to have a right to do their due diligence inspections. So they're going to have a right to go in the property. So if they want to go into contract, without having been in the property first, and if the seller wants to do that also, then yeah, the parties can agree. And to me, I mean, it just seems like it seems like it probably is okay. And it also seems like it makes sense, simply because, and I'm thinking in particular of Durham here, where if it's a coming soon property, it's nobody's allowed in it right now. And then doing this would, give the buyer some ability to, get in there and inspect it and decide whether they want to proceed or not. So I think it's all right.
Okay. Now we have follow-up questions on that. Wouldn't the date need to be after it went public
No.
for that? No?
No. Coming soon property can go under contract. I
Yeah,
mean, the biggest thing is that coming soon properties cannot be shown. But if you get an offer on a coming soon property and you submit to your seller and your seller likes it and wants to sign it, then you can go under contract without showing it or anything.
I wish you could, I'm not sure exactly what this means, but Laura Grace says prohibited and impaired by stay-at-home order. Maybe I should see if I can figure out, or Cub or Ashley can help me let Laura Grace go ahead and talk so she can say what it is that she means by this. It sounds like people have some questions here. I know there's a way to make somebody able to talk.
Can
Maybe
you
you
hear
can.
me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Go ahead.
good.
Great.
Well done. Okay, because he said you could use it for coming soon, but the very first paragraph says that you're prohibited or impaired as a result of one or more so-called stay-at-home orders, where coming soon is not really related to a stay-at-home order often. The very first paragraph addresses that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that sentence having to do with the stay-at-home orders really, that's a separate issue than coming soon in my mind. Yes, I understand what you're saying, that the coming soon prevents anyone from getting in there anyway. So I understand that. What I'm thinking of is like this. Say you have a coming soon property in Durham where you can't just go in with your buyer agent and look at the property. That is not allowed in Durham right now. Okay. So you could submit, something like this, and then that way have a little bit of flexibility with the date down here in paragraph 1 to be able to have the buyer agent and the buyer sort of coordinate how they're going to be able to view the property if they don't have a system in place already. I don't think that this preamble up here would mean that you can't use it on a coming soon property. I see them as two completely different issues. Basically, a coming soon property in Durham right now would have two prohibitions from buyer going in there. One would be that it's coming soon, and so you can't let anybody in there anyway. And number 2 would be under the Durham order, you can't just go in there with your buyer agent and look over the property. The buyer agent's not allowed in there at the same time as the buyer. So once you remove if you go into contract, then you remove that coming soon prohibition, and then you just have to deal with the stay-at-home part. And I think that paragraph 1 would just give you, a little bit more time to figure that part out. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I guess it's fine. But in some areas, there isn't a stay-at-home order. Like in Wake County, you can both go in and look at the property. So in that case, could you use this addendum if the buyer was out of town and wanted to fly in? Because I had this happen.
Yeah, no, I think that, stay-at-home orders, like, they could take all sorts of shapes as far as how they hold things up. Okay. I think it's hard to anticipate that. So just because you're in Wake County and you're only under the governor's order, which is pretty flexible, you can still use this addendum if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you.
So John, Craig asks, so what if there's a preview addendum with no preview fee? That it sounds like it's just a way to get around the coming soon showing restrictions, like maybe these two things are you know, causing a little confusion.
I mean, I guess so, but at the end of the day, it really would be something where you're going under contract anyway. I'm not sure how you can really, if somebody wants to try and get around coming soon by going under contract, then they can, with or without this addendum. I don't really see this addendum as a force one way or the other. You could, you could just go under contract without the addendum and have that be a way to get around coming soon also, and sort of structure the contract the same way. So I guess, what I would say is that if you're going to put 0 in here, then I really don't understand the purpose of this addendum. Or I don't know. I guess I'll put it this way. If you got 0 in here and you're under the governor's order, then yes, I don't really see any purpose with this addendum. I just don't. You can get in there and do what you need to do. But yeah, I think it's the same analysis either way, whether you got this addendum or not. If somebody wants to go into contract on a coming soon property, then they're going to be permitted to do their due diligence inspections right away.
Since these subtleties and nuances of all of these are the things where we are always looking for guidance, maybe we could get Craig also unmuted to just maybe go over the nuances of his questions, because he pointed out you lose the due diligence fee without the addendum. So I think that's one of the things where people are trying to decide which form to use.
I don't support what I'm suggesting, but I could just see agents getting together and say, hey, look, just send us an offer, no preview fee. Then you can get in and see the home. And if your buyer doesn't like it, they just cancel the contract and they're not out any money. I just think it's a way agents are going to be clever enough to figure out to get around coming soon. And I don't like it, but I don't know what you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess if this happened like more than once or went on repeatedly with a particular house, then I think you have an ethics problem, probably.
I agree, it's an ethics problem, but it doesn't look like it's addressed by what we're doing here.
Well, I guess here's what I would say is if the ethics already covers it, then there's no reason to cover it again in an addendum. Now, I don't sit on the forms committee, so I don't do all the discussions on this. My partner Will does. And so to me, I don't know what the committee discussed and whether that was part of their questions or not. But what I can tell you is that, at least in my mind, if the ethics already cover it, then there's no reason to also put it into the contract. Otherwise, you have to put every single article of the Code of Ethics repeated into the contract, for the agents. But the ethics, the code is there, and so if an agent's abusing it, then they're going to potentially be subject to discipline by the board.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
Right.
You have another form to go over, or are we just down to going over most of the common things that people are questioning you about?
If there's no questions on the forms, no further questions on the forms, it's interesting because this here is actually like at least another hour's worth of material, to be honest. But this is just a brief summary of some common questions we get on the legal hotline. And so I'll just go through these very briefly, and we're going to wrap up at 1. Is that right? What I was planning on doing was going to 12:45 and then probably stopping there for questions. And I guess what I'll do is try to get through this in about 10 minutes or so and see if there's 10 minutes of questions. But we will see. Everyone, I guess I'll put it this way. If you look here, you can see there's 15 questions. And interestingly, these were the 15 most common questions before COVID-19. So, I'm sure they will be again. It's just right now, they're probably not the most asked questions. I would say probably the most common question the last couple of weeks has had to do with unemployment. And unemployment and what else? Like the loans and you know, the PPP and things like that. Those are probably the most common, but we've started to get more transactional questions lately. And so a lot of these questions have started resurfacing. Hopefully everyone can see them okay. I'm going to make them just a little bit bigger for everybody. But I did want to make sure that everybody was able to see the legal hotline email address, which is the only way we're really taking questions right now, just because the Greensboro office is all teleworking. And usually the hotline goes through the Greensboro office. So that's why the phone number's on there. But anyway, all right. We already talked about this a little bit. This has to do with fixtures and personal property as part of the listening area. We talked about that. This is a pretty common question that we get. And in fact, I've had this question twice this week, and you know, and it's only Wednesday. But this has been a hotline question twice this week. And you know, the answer is always the same. If it's not in the contract, it does not exist. If it's in the MLS, but it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist. That's it, period, end of story. At the end of the contract is what we would call in the legal industry is a merger clause, which says if it's not in here, then it doesn't exist. So make sure that if there's something in the MLS your client really wants, that it gets into the contract. The second question I got here is a buyer agent email that the buyer agent, sorry, buyers. I didn't write this, but this is just not phrased. Buyer agent email that buyer's terminating before the end of due diligence period. Got you. All right. So in this question, the buyer agent is sending an email to terminate the transaction before the end of due diligence period. And there's no termination form signed by the buyer. Well, unless you have a power of attorney, you don't have the authority as the agent to terminate the transaction. So if you're getting close to the end of due diligence period and you send one of these emails, it is not sufficient to terminate the transaction. Make sure you have something signed by your client to terminate. Even if it's just an email from your client that you're forwarding on. If you know, for some reason you're having a computer problem and you can't get in the forms or something like that, or you don't know which form to use, then make sure you get something in there to terminate by the end of the due diligence period. We've been getting we eliminated the contingent sale addendum last July, and we are still getting questions about it. And the biggest thing is that the reason it was eliminated, and this was part of a lot of the presentations that we did last summer, but the form, it was constantly a source of questions and confusion from agents. It was a holdover from the old form that was not a due diligence form, the old contract. The old contract was a series of contingencies, and you know, contingent sale being one of them. It was just a holdover from that. And you can structure the 2T in a way to accomplish the same thing. You can set your due diligence period or whatever you need to do, whatever timelines you need to do. You can set them so the buyer can be able to sell their house if they need to. And if they can't, then they need to make that decision at the end of the due diligence period instead of at settlement, which really put the seller in a bad spot. It really, it just moves up that decision for the buyer earlier to the end of the due diligence period instead of a settlement as to whether they can sell their house and proceed in the transaction or not. Then we have question 4 here. What if the buyer fails to timely deliver due diligence fee or initial earnest money deposit? And this is a question that comes, in my mind, comes up a surprising amount, but it is a very frequent question. And that is you need to look at the demand at the bottom of page 1 going on to page 2 of the 2T. The seller needs to make a demand, and there's actually a form for that demand. And let me see what it is. I always forget the number of this form. Let's see here. No, I can't find it. Where is this thing? There it is. It's 355. A lot of agents, 355-T, a lot of agents don't know we have that form. But basically, you can just, check off the boxes, send it, make a demand to the buyer agent to deliver the funds. And then if they don't do it within one banking day, then the seller can terminate the contract. So just make sure you're aware of that if you are not. Question 5. I'm not sure if we have any property managers out there, but fair housing and emotional support animals / assistance animals is a very, very common question. This particular question is whether a rental prospect who has registration papers for their dog can get an exception to the pet fee. Usually it's because the tenant doesn't want to pay the pet fee or anything like that as part of having an animal in the house. Or if it's a no pet policy house, being able to get their pet in, or their assistance animal, in this the case may be. And I could talk about this for quite a while, but the bottom line is really that if someone has a disability and they have, a note from a medical professional that says that they have a disability and a need for the animal for the disability, then the landlord needs to make a reasonable accommodation if possible. And that's really the simplest way to put it. Now, this here, if a rental prospect has simply registration papers, like say they've registered with someplace online, that's not going to fly. That's not something from a medical professional that says they have a disability and a need for the animal for the disability. Question 6 here, unpermitted improvements in square footage. You can advertise unpermitted improvements in square footage, but just make sure that you're aware that unpermitted improvements would be a material fact. You got to tell the buyer if you've got unpermitted improvements. Mostly because there's potential tax consequences and other things of that nature for someone who has unpermitted improvements. So you don't want the buyer to later get a surprise and then come back and sue the seller because the tax office and permit office and everything else is coming after them after they bought a house that had some unpermitted improvements on it. Question 7, we get, it's not a really common question about discharging a listing firm, but it does come up with some regularity. The biggest thing is that whether you're on the buy or the sell side, if your client wants to tell you to get lost, then you can get lost. They can tell you to quit being the agent. That's their right. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that they're released from their obligation to pay you if the property goes on the contract or things like that. But as far as whether you are their agent anymore and working for them further, they can do that. So a lot of times we'll get calls from agents wanting to take on one of these, buyers or sellers. Can I actually do it? Well, yes, but if you don't work it out with the other agent, then your client may be looking at paying 2 fees, or, if it's something where, the property is already under contract and this happens, you're not even the procuring cause. So you may not be entitled to compensation. And if an arbitration dispute gets kicked up, then you may lose that. So just make sure that you're aware, what I would say is this is, we believe that everyone has the right to be represented, but just make sure as an agent, if you're taking on, a client that's in this position, that you're aware of the risks and the importance of working it out with the first firm, if at all possible. Number 8, generally with estate property, it's the beneficiaries. So make sure you get them in there. And depending on if there's a will, sometimes the estate may be directed to dispose of property a certain way. Almost always, if you don't know or if you're unsure, have the beneficiary sign and then the estate also join just in case. Even if they don't, Usually the estate is not going to be selling the property, the estate itself, so the administrator, but definitely the beneficiaries, and if possible, have the estate join in also, just in case you need them down the line. On question 9, putting NA in the due diligence period blank. This is on the 2T. We've been getting this question less because we've been harping on it. Do not do that. Just do not do that. It is very ambiguous if you put NA in that particular blank, because the due diligence period starts, from the time the contract is executed, from the effective date. So if you put NA in there, are you saying that there's no due diligence period, or are you just saying that there's no end date? Your intent might be to say that there's no due diligence period, but in fact, there's a pretty good argument to say that you've just said, no, the due diligence period is going to go all the way to settlement. So just don't do that. Make sure you put something in there, an end date, something concrete, so that in fact, it will definitely end on a particular date. Let's see. I'm getting low on time, so I'll just see if any of these other ones. Well, I'll put it this way. You can see these other questions right here, hopefully. And if you have questions on the remaining 10 through 15, you can ask them. But otherwise, it's 12:51, so we got about 9 minutes for question and answers. And I'll see if I can bring up the chat here. Yeah, there it is. Oh, whoops.
It looks like Craig wants you to go over number 10, please, the FHA VA financing addendum.
Okay.
And a low appraisal, and Kitty says too. She wants to hear it too. So can you go over that one, number 10?
All right. So
Thanks.
number 10. If you have the FHA VA financing addendum and there's a low appraisal, first of all, that appraisal locks in. So, and I want to say it's for 90 days. I usually have to look up that specific time frame. Maybe it's 120. Anyway, the appraisal, it attaches to that property, for a good amount of time. So one of the questions that we get, when this happens is what happens to the due diligence fee, because there can't be a penalty when there's a low appraisal. Our response has consistently been the same, for the entire time I've been here. And that is that the due diligence fee is not a penalty. Due diligence fee is a fee that the parties have agreed to so that the buyer can complete due diligence as any other buyer. It's not, we wouldn't consider it a penalty for any other buyer, and we definitely wouldn't consider it a penalty just because there's a particular kind of loan being used. So the due diligence fee always goes to the seller. If there's a low appraisal, that doesn't mean the buyer is going to get their due diligence fee back. Not under the VA or the FHA financing guidelines. So that's a question that we get fairly regularly, and it's a pretty simple answer. Any other questions?
I'm watching. Whoop, here comes one. Armand would like to see number 15 addressed, please.
All right, so number 15 is, can a seller be required to perform a real estate contract? Yes. Under North Carolina law, all real estate is considered unique. So if a buyer if a seller says, no, you can't have my property, but the contract does not permit the seller to terminate, the buyer can take the seller to court and pursue an action called specific performance. Specific performance is exactly what it sounds like. The buyer asks the court to enter an order saying, please force the seller to sell me the property. And I think in most instances, as long as there has been a breach by the buyer, there's a pretty good chance that's going to happen. So just be aware of that. If you got a difficult seller, and they want to back out and the buyer hasn't breached and they have no true ability to terminate, then just make sure you tell them to go see a lawyer before they, if at all possible, try to convince them to go see a lawyer before they do that.
So John, it looks like that we are not having a lot of specific questions, but there's some interest in having you go over the rest of them while you run out your time. And I can watch and see if somebody comes up with something, but if you could go on with the disclosures of defects that have been repaired and just move from there, then we can run it out. Thanks.
That sounds good. All right, so question 11. This is probably the most difficult gray area on this whole list, at least for me, because what you're talking about here is disclosure of material facts. And a lot of times, if you look at what the commission has written on this kind of stuff, what they do is they obviously encourage disclosure as much as possible. But I guess here's the way that I explain it. Let's say a house has a fire, and you do the remediation for the fire, and then the seller turns around and sells the house, say in, I don't know, let's say 4 to 6 months, pretty shortly thereafter, they go and sell it. To me, this is just my opinion, you're in material fact territory. You must disclose that, because the buyer needs to be aware so that they can go through and have someone inspect to make sure that those repairs are done properly. And I would say anytime there's been a fairly recent repair of any substantial part of the house, if it's a foundation repair, if it's a roof repair, anything like that, that is something that you're going to want to make sure gets disclosed. If it's like a regular, I'm looking at the chat, if it's like a regular old little roof leak, or if it was something small like that, I don't know, that's going to be case by case, I think. I would say if the roof leak was something where it was causing any sort of moisture damage inside the house, yeah, that's going to be material, because the buyer's going to want to be able to have someone go in there and make sure that stuff is dried out enough. But I mean, if it's just like a little drip, say it's in the garage and it hasn't caused any damage at all, and it was just something that needed to be done, yeah, maybe that's not going to be it. I think material facts are usually going to be the major systems. It's going to be a major repair, so it's not every ticky-tack thing that's in an inspection report is material. And if it's repaired, needs to be disclosed. So make sure that you're aware that, as far as whether it's material or not, probably is going to have to do more with whether it's a major system rather than whether it's just some kind of defect that's been repaired. The bigger the system, and probably the more recent to repair, the more I think you're in material fact category. But if you've lived in the house 10 years, say you got something fixed 10 years ago, is that going to be a material fact? I would suspect probably not. Even if it's something big, 10 years without a problem, I think you're probably out of material fact territory. But anyway, it's going to vary case by case and system by system. Number 12, sharing inspection report with other buyers. That's a really interesting question, simply because, and I see the chat as far as disclosure. I'll come back to that in a second. But inspection reports, please make sure you get the permission of the inspector if at all possible. Think of inspection reports as like a book. Unless you've been given a report that says, listen, share this however you want, and you got that from the inspector, then you need to treat it as a book that you've purchased. And you wouldn't go and make copies of that book and just distribute it everywhere, okay? That would be a copyright violation. And I think there's an argument that inspection reports fall in that same territory. So make sure that you get the permission from the inspector if all possible. Maybe they'd be willing to accept a small fee for you to be able to do that. But I can tell you, I've spoken to enough inspectors to know that, if you take your report and say it was with the previous buyer and you start printing them off and handing them out at open houses and stuff like that, that's a guaranteed way to get yourself into hot water. As far as whether the inspection belongs to the buyer or not, yes. No, it's not up to them necessarily. No, that depends on their contract with the inspector. And as an agent, if you get a copy of a report, you have no further rights than whatever the buyer has. So if the buyer doesn't have the right to share that report, then you don't either. That's sort of how copyright law works. So let's see, I'm going to go back. Hold on a minute. On the disclosure form, yes, all the boxes should be completed one way or the other. Can I ask them to complete the form and say, I have not got a disclosure when writing an offer? No. I would say just because they've missed one part of the form doesn't mean you didn't get a disclosure. I would say you, especially if they just missed one, I would say you got a disclosure. It's just not a complete disclosure. But yeah, no, it's definitely something that should be fixed. But I wouldn't say that you didn't get a disclosure. I guess I wouldn't go that far. Let's see. Procuring cause, listing agent versus buyer agent. This doesn't come up that often, but usually it comes up, back in the good old days when open houses were happening. The listing agent every once in a while would be able to pick up somebody who, was just going through the home and who's really going to win that battle. Here's the thing about procuring cause. If you've ever been part of an arbitration dispute with the local board, it's like a 6-page analysis of who's procuring cause. It's not just one thing that determines procuring cause. So it's really, if you're not familiar with those forms, then you want to look at that. And then finally, 14 is very simple. If you've got a 3-bedroom septic, then your house is 3-bedroom. You could have 20 bedrooms in there, but you can only advertise it as a 3. If it's a 3-bedroom septic, that's all your house is. You got a bunch of bonus rooms.
Well, John, congratulations. We only went 1 minute over. I think you went through those really quickly, and I want to thank you for being so timely and getting through it all.
No problem.
And, I'm sure we have some good follow-ups, and everybody, this was taped, so we'll be pushing it out. Ashley will be letting everybody know if they want to watch it or go back to something, and we've kept some notes, and we'll be using that to try to determine what our future educational programs are looking like. We're trying to give you all what it is that you need to know, but we just really thank you for showing up and also for being patient with us while we all learn our new things. Great. Thank you so much, John.
No problem. No problem at all.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.